Venezuela. How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. It's going to be very educational, whether you're watching this stream on YouTube, on Rumble, or on Ganjing World. Mr. President, the ISIS of the Western Hemisphere. This is how he is comparing the drug cartels or alleged drug cartels in Latin America or South America, and also building a case against Venezuela. They have emptied the prisons, and sent the criminals to the United States. They are sending drugs to the United States. If you really scratch the surface and check beneath the surface, we will find a really complicated, complex, and troubling reality. Now, we're not going to do hatred against anyone, including the United States itself or the American people. We are going to academically and journalistically criticize the U.S. foreign policy, because we believe on this channel that it's not the business of the United States to intervene in anywhere around the world and impose and dictate how they should govern themselves and how they should manage their own natural resources, because this is the main issue when it comes to the United States, when it comes to Venezuela. So brace yourself, guys. Today's stream is not going to be easy. It's going to be very educational, analytical, rich with geopolitics and history. I have done a lot of research today in order to bring to you this stream. So if you appreciate this work, please hit the like button as you watch this, because as you do, this stream passes through the algorithm of YouTube and more people would watch it now, live, and later when this live streaming is over. But the main title of today's stream is going to be Why Venezuela Matters. You know, my friends, every time Washington starts talking about freedom and democracy, I reach for my map. I have a big map behind me, because somewhere out there, a country with oil, gas, or rare minerals is about to have a very bad year. This month, unfortunately, this country happens to be Venezuela. Now, why Venezuela, you may ask? Why does this nation of 28 million people sitting on the northern shoulder of South America command such obsessive attention from the United States? So let's break it down calmly, historically, and with a dash of irony. Let's start with the treasure beneath the soil. And this is going to be hilarious, because when we check the numbers, it will be mind-boggling, right? First, and this is about oil. Not just a lot of oil, Venezuela is the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. Around 303 billion barrels officially recognized by OPEC. 303 billion barrels officially recognized by OPEC. That's more than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, and almost 1/5 of all the oil humanity has found. But it doesn't stop there, my friends. Beneath Venezuela's soil lie more than only oil. We have a lot of gold, diamonds, and coltan. The last one is a key ingredient for your smartphone and electric cars. I hope you don't drive electric cars anyways, but if you do, they are essential. So when someone in Washington says Venezuela is a threat to US national security, what they often mean is Venezuela is sitting on what our corporations need. This is as simple as it is. It's the same logic that has guided a century of interventions by the US, whether in Iran in 1953, Guatemala in 1954, or Iraq in 2003. If you change the name or change the decade, the script still stays the same. You start by demonizing a government, in this case, the Bolivarian government, the socialist government, Maduro government, call it a regime, a dictatorship, narco state, all these things, right? We have heard the US officials calling Venezuela. So demonize the government, strangle the government through sanctions, announce that the people deserve democracy in Venezuela and in other places, of course, and finally install someone friendly to, coincidentally, your corporations or to Wall Street. So this is the treasure beneath the soil, but it doesn't stop there, because we have also the ideological factor in this. And the ideological factor, I would assume, let me play this video, because I also collected some nice videos for you today. So resources aren't only the only reason, my friends. There is also ideology playing at play, let's say. Since the early 2000s, Venezuela has been a laboratory for something Washington despises, right? A sovereign socialist experiment in the Western Hemisphere. Now, I'm not a socialist. I'm not a capitalist. I really have no strong opinions, let's say, about socialism, whether with or against. But when you see why the United States hates Venezuela so much, we really have to understand that Venezuela represents an example in South America as a sovereign socialist experiment. When Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999, he didn't just nationalize the oil, he also redefined the state's role. He poured oil revenues into social programs, education, housing, and regional cooperation through ALBA and PetroCaribe. And this was for US policymakers a heresy, because if socialism worked, even imperfectly, it could inspire other people, right? And other nations in Latin America or around the world. And for the US empire, because the US empire is built on the idea that capitalism is destiny, and that's the only formula that works, this type of inspiration, a socialist inspiration, or let's say a socialism working even imperfectly, this is very dangerous for the United States. So we have oil, we have the ideology, and we have the crime of the sovereignty. Now, when we speak about sovereignty, we have to understand that Venezuela has an independent foreign policy, right? Caracas forged alliances, for example, with the competitors of the United States, such as Russia, China, and Iran. And those countries, Washington loves to sanction them, right? But up until this moment, cannot really control them. So in diplomatic language, that is called a multipolar strategy. Like in Washington's dictionary, it is called a threat to our interests. So in reality, there are a group of countries trying to come up with a multipolar strategy, but in Washington's dictionary, that looks like those countries are challenging my primacy, and therefore they are a threat to our interests. So Venezuela's real crime, in my opinion, isn't really dictatorship or corruption, because there are lots of dictatorships and corruption in countries that the US are allied with and even calls them strategic partners. I think the real issue here is Venezuela refusing to bow, right? Some people in Venezuela come and say we have lots of authoritarianism and corruption. I'm not going to argue against that. Probably there are levels of dictatorship or corruption in Venezuela. But the real issue why the US is coming after Venezuela is because Caracas is refusing to bow. That's the truth of the matter. Because Venezuela insists on choosing its own political path, trading partners, and also ideology. And in a world still run by a unipolar mindset, sovereignty itself becomes subversion, right? So here comes the irony of the peace president. The irony is that in 2025, Donald Trump, the self-proclaimed president of peace, has authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations in Venezuela, right? At the same time, US warships are docking in Trinidad and Tobago for joint exercises. American senators are casually talking about assassinations or assassinating Maduro on television. And the word regime change has quietly re-entered the mainstream vocabulary. So if this is peace, I would hate to see war, right? So why this moment is very important and why does it matter? Venezuela today, my friends, is not the same country it was during the 2019 Guaido episode. The Venezuelan opposition is fragmented. The economy, after years of sanctions and hyperinflation, is showing fragile signs of recovery, and global power dynamics have shifted. So we have now a situation where China, Russia, India, Venezuela, and others, the broader BRICS plus bloc, are challenging US dominance still in trade, energy, and finance, not in geopolitics and military. In this context, a successful US operation in Venezuela wouldn't just change one government, it would send a message to the entire global South and tell them, you are not allowed to be independent. That is why, in my opinion, this story matters far beyond Caracas. Because who gets control of the resources in Venezuela, right? Who would decide or define democracy and decide which nations are allowed to prosper outside Washington's orbit? So this is how we see that the US is setting the stage. And tonight, on this show, as we dissect this new campaign, the CIA's covert operations, the senators' open threats, and the opposition's glossy rebranding, like they did in Syria, keep this, my friends, in mind. Venezuela is not just a political battlefield. It has to be seen as a mirror, right? Because in it, we can see the reflection of an empire struggling to maintain dominance, a world shifting toward multipolarity, and the people basically caught between them. Because when the richest nation on earth, the United States, and the richest and the strongest empire humanity has seen, keeps trying to liberate others at gunpoint, maybe, just maybe, it's not about liberation. Maybe the goal is not about liberation. Maybe, just maybe, I'm saying it's about ownership. So, my friends, you can always tell when Washington decides to turn up the heat, right? The language changes suddenly. We start hearing words like freedom and human rights, and these words start appearing next to aircraft carriers and CIA briefings. And that's exactly what we are seeing right now in Venezuela. Because the CIA comes out of shadows all of a sudden. And this time in mid-October, so we're in the late October, this is in mid-October, I have to show you this article coming from the, just a second, my mouse decided that it has to make pain in the ass, sorry. So this is the article, Trump administration authorizes covert CIA action in Venezuela. This was on the New York Times. Donald Trump personally authorized covert CIA actions inside Venezuela. So the reporting describes, my friends, a multi-agency directive allowing intelligence operations to gather, disrupt, and where necessary, neutralize hostile assets aligned with the Maduro regime. They have also put, I think, $50 million as bounty on the head of Maduro. So if we translate this into real world terms, we could say that America is telling the world, we are back to playing kingmaker in Latin America, right? So Trump now, of course, isn't shy about it. He's not like hiding his intentions from the people. And when he was asked, he said Maduro is been stealing from his people for years. We are just helping Venezuelans get their freedom back. MashaAllah, Habibi. America only cares about the people in Venezuela. That line, my friends, should sound familiar, of course. It's the same one used in Iraq, Libya, Syria, always about helping people, but never about pipelines or contracts, right? So we have a situation where they speak about human rights and democracy and the people in Venezuela, but at the same time, it's warships and wings. Because just a few days ago, the US Navy destroyer, I will show you this video. This was only a few days ago, by the way. The US basically, so let's see, where is it? This is it. Only a few days ago, the US Navy destroyer USS Gravely docked in Trinidad and Tobago. It's a small Caribbean nation, only a few hours sail from Venezuelan shores. I will show you the map now shortly. Officially, they say this is a joint anti-narcotics and counterterrorism exercise. Of course, Venezuela saw it as a military provocation coordinated with the CIA, and the foreign minister of Venezuela condemned it as a direct threat to regional peace. It's a familiar pattern, right? The US sends hardware, this time a destroyer, near a target country, gives it a harmless sounding name, and waits for a reaction that can be labeled aggression, right? We saw this, or we see this all the time in the Persian Gulf with Iran, in the South China Sea with China, and now in the Caribbean. So this is the video, as you see. And now this is the map. As you see, this is Trinidad and Tobago. Tobago, not tobacco. And this is Venezuela. They're just on the borders with Venezuela, right? So basically, we are going back, or this is the return of regime change rhetoric that we are so familiar with. But perhaps, I'm just saying perhaps, the most striking thing this time isn't the ships or the spies. It's the casual tone in Washington, right? I will show you a few videos now. Those are so hilarious. This is Senator Rick Scott of Florida. He never won to miss a camera. And this is what he said. I will show you the video. So Senator Rick Scott.
If I was Maduro, I'd head to Russia or China right now.
Because?
His days are numbered. Something's going to happen. Whether it's internal or external, I think something's going to happen.
The firepower that's off the coast, right? This is an armada. This is a lot of U.S. forces. Are we about to invade Venezuela?
I don't think so. I mean, if we do, I'd be surprised.
Earlier this month, President.
So this is basically Senator Rick Scott. He says, if I were Maduro, or President Maduro should head to Russia or China, saying his days are numbered and that something is going to happen. And he says, if I were Maduro, I would be heading to Russia or China right now. His days are numbered. And if you want to translate this, of course, it means we're planning something big and you should start packing, right? Another warmonger in the US, of course, Lindsey Graham never misses a chance to jump on the wagon of wars and regime changes and destruction of people's lives. he says it's time for Nicolas Maduro to go.
The examples you're citing also involved ground troops. You said time for Maduro to go.
Yeah.
That sounds a lot like regime
Yeah, it
change.
is.
Are you talking about troops on the ground?
I'll let the president speak to that. I'm talking about a briefing that would expand military operations potentially from the sea to the land. It is time for Maduro to go. It was time for Ortega to go. The Monroe Doctrine has been robustly applied by President Trump. So these military assets are moving forward to deal with a country that's got blood on its hands when it comes to Americans by flooding our country with drugs from Venezuela and Colombia. So I hope Maduro would leave peacefully, but I don't think he's going to stay around much longer. I think President Trump is tired of Venezuela being used as a staging platform to poison America.
Well, there's a lot there, sir, but you cited a Democratic senator's criticism. He's not the only one.
Yeah.
Some of your Republican colleagues have been uncomfortable with what little information has been shared with Congress. Take a listen.
But if they want all-out war where we kill anybody and everybody that is in the country of Venezuela or coming out, that has to have a declaration of war. It's something that is not pretty, very expensive, and I'm not in favor of declaring war on Venezuela, but the Congress should vote itself.
If this was happening with this level of insight under the Biden administration, I'd be apoplectic.
Todd Young also criticized this. What exactly is the end game? Because you're talking about regime change in Venezuela. The president says this is about drug boats.
Yeah. Well, I think the end game is to make sure that Venezuela and Colombia cannot be used to poison America, that the narco-terrorist dictator Maduro no longer be able to threaten our country and to send in drugs to kill Americans. As to Rand Paul, I just disagree fundamentally with his approach. We didn't have a declaration to go into Panama. Bush 41 went into Panama to replace the leadership there because the Panamanian leadership, were working with drug cartels to threaten our country. Reagan didn't have a declaration of war, congressional authorization to deal with Cuban influence. So this idea of Rand Paul, I just fundamentally disagree with. To the other senators, you deserve more information and you're going to get more information. But there is no requirement for Congress to declare war before the commander-in-chief can use force. Panama and Grenada are two examples in our backyard where Republican presidents chose to go after countries and leaders that were threatening our people.
So basically, you don't have to go to Congress and get the war mandate to go into war against Venezuela because these countries are, because of the historical examples, and also these countries are poisoning allegedly our people by drugs. So apparently the United States can always find excuses. If it's in the Middle East, you have the WMDs. You have nuclear weapons, you have alleged chemical weapons, you have the element of democracy and human rights. And when it comes to Latin America, you have these drug cartels who could be used as an excuse for intervention and regime changes. And the United States doesn't need an excuse and doesn't need an authorization from the UN Security Council or a consensus in the international community. And unfortunately also, that all these rising powers, in my opinion, aren't going to do much to help Venezuela survive. And when I say Venezuela, because in my opinion, this has nothing to do with drugs and the fentanyls and whatever they're talking about. It's about the natural resources of Venezuela. And this has been proven over and over again. Even the opposition candidate, this woman, says that if she becomes the leader of Venezuela, she will privatize the oil sector and she will put all the earth minerals in the disposition of the U.S. corporations. So in my opinion, this is a serious situation where Venezuela could be knocked out and they could really suffer a huge a decade-long blow if a regime change happens there. And I'm not saying that the Maduro regime is perfect, and I'm not a socialist, as I mentioned multiple times, and I'm not defending Maduro out of any socialist or ideological ground. All I'm saying is the Venezuelan people will pay a very heavy price. Their entire wealth will be privatized. They will get nothing from it, and they will celebrate in the streets later, just like the Syrians have done, for their so-called freedom, and which is slavery, right? They will package it the way that the Venezuelan people have gained their freedom finally. We also have my friends James Story. James Story is the former ambassador to Venezuela, by the way. He was also on 60 Minutes. He says, this is a criminal organization masquerading as a government, says Ambassador James Story, the last American diplomat at the now closed U.S. Embassy in Venezuela.
This is a very bad actor sitting on top of the world's largest known reserves of oil, plus the critical minerals that will fuel the 21st century economy.
At least
and he's in bed with our strategic competitors.
And how has he been able to cling to power for as long as he has?
I mean, let's be very clear. This is a criminal organization masquerading as a government. This is an individual who is under indictment for narcotics trafficking, commits human rights violations, someone who has used the apparatus of the state to throw people in jail, to torture them, to kill them. This is a very...
What's the job of these journalists in the United States? Just sitting in front of an American official, a diplomat, a warmonger, and just agree? Like, seriously, what is the role of the journalist in this case? Isn't the job of the journalist to ask hard questions, to push against the narratives and prevent war, try to prevent war? How is it possible that these people are called journalists, and we, the people who are pushing against the wars, are called conspiracy theorists, radicals, and all these names that they call us? Aren't we doing the job of the journalist by truly telling the people the real reason and the motivation behind the potential war and the regime change operation against Venezuela? Aren't we here telling the truth to the people? We are the journalists in this case, right? We are the journalists. My friends, all this is happening under a man, this man, and all this is happening under his patronage, who is branding himself as the peace president, right? Remember the campaign slogan, no new wars. Technically, Trump may say he's avoiding a war because these are covert and surgical operations, but ask the people who lived through Libya's and Syria's experiences how that turned out. In modern Washington, peace just means bombs you don't declare on television. Even, why this is not moving. Even within the Republican Party, some are uneasy about this. Like I showed you, Senator Rand Paul called the recent boat strikes near Venezuela extrajudicial killings. That's a rare sentence in American politics. The word extrajudicial usually applies to other countries, but it shows that even a few on Capitol Hill understand the legal and moral danger here. So, if we want to talk about the human and diplomatic fallout in this case, I think inside Venezuela, these developments are really tightening nerves. The government in Venezuela has placed its armed forces on high alert and called for emergency meetings with allies in the region such as Cuba, Bolivia, and Nicaragua, all of whom are known or know how Washington's liberations or alleged liberations usually end. At the same time, we have many international observers are calling for restraint, basically, by the United States. But we have a media, unfortunately, marching orders. In this case, my friends, turn on any US mainstream media outlet or a newspaper nowadays this week, and you will notice the choreography. you will notice this. Every headline suddenly reads like a synchronized script. They will start talking about Maduro cracks down on these descendants or on opposition. They will talk about opposition hero calls for democracy, US ways option, we're fighting against the narco terrorists, and etc. It's the same framing that warmed up audiences before any intervention of the last 30 years. And the trick is very simple, by the way. Moralize the story until the public forgets there is oil underneath Venezuela. And if that moral narrative needs a face, Washington just happens to have one. Maria Corina Machado, the so-called opposition leader newly crowned with, who recently crowned a Nobel Peace Prize. Like if you watch her speeches, her speeches are all polished. Her English is perfect. Her economic plan music is like a music to the ears of Wall Street and the corporations in the United States. And this is what she really believes. She literally says we are going to privatize all our industry. US companies are going to make a lot of money.
Forget about Saudi Arabia. Forget about the Saudis. I mean, we have more oil. I mean, infinite potential. And we're going to open markets. We're going to kick off the government from the oil sector. We are going to privatize all our industries. Venezuela has huge resources: oil, gas, minerals, land, technology. And as you said before, we have a strategic location, hours from the United States. So we're going to do this right. We know what we have to do.
Man, these people are really shameless. I truly do not understand how can anybody invite foreign country to invade his or her country and tell them, come, Habibi, we have lots of minerals here. We have lots of oil. Forget about Saudi Arabia. We will replace them. We have a lot to give to you. You will be rich. She doesn't speak about the Venezuelan people. She speaks about the US and how the US will benefit from this. I'm sorry, but this is a pure definition of treason. Anyways, let's go to the mechanics of American regime change operations, and we will talk about the steps of these regime change operations. Because, my friends, people often ask, how does the US actually do this regime change operations, right? How do they turn a functioning or at least surviving country into an international villain overnight? How do they go from, we disagree with this government, to this government must be overthrown? Well, they don't come like suddenly. They build an ecosystem and they start step by step. So the first step is economic asphyxiation. I tried to pronounce this so much today. Economic asphyxiation. So the economic asphyxiation is the first and the oldest trick in the regime change manual. And it simply means make daily life unbearable. Venezuela has been under US sanctions since 2015, right? Officially justified as a punishment for human rights violations. But let's look at the numbers, my friends. By 2021, the US had blocked or frozen an estimated of $40 billion in Venezuelan state assets, banned its oil exports, and cut off its access to the global banking system. And when you deny a country access to its own oil revenues, medicine imports, and credit, the result is predictable, right? You will have shortages, you will have inflation and despair. Then, here is the cynical part. You film the despair, call it the failure of socialism, and use it as moral fuel for more sanctions. Even the United Nations admitted that unilateral US measures worsened Venezuela's humanitarian crisis, but Washington never blinked because the suffering of the Venezuelan people isn't just a side effect. It's the whole purpose of it is to make the Venezuelan people suffer. It's the pressure point in the hands of the US. So step one is economic asphyxiation. Step 2, opposition incubation. Like, while sanctions weaken the state, the next phase is about constructing an alternative power center, right? In Venezuela, that meant cultivating opposition figures. Not all of them are bad people, but all of them are useful for the US. Do you remember Juan Guaido? That funny character, this guy. Juan Guaido, they have ironed our brains about him in the past years, right? He went from total obscurity to interim president overnight after a phone call from former Vice President Mike Pence. That was a regime change theater. One man declares himself president, the US recognizes him, and suddenly parallel state exists on paper. Guaido's so-called government even got control of Venezuela's frozen US assets. Those are billions and billions and tens of billions of dollars. And those money didn't go for schools or hospitals in Venezuela, but for alleged democracy promotion, right? So when that experiment failed spectacularly, Washington swapped actors but kept the script. Now we have Maria Corina Machado, this woman who is, as I mentioned, has a polished English. She recently got the Nobel Peace Prize, which is a soft power halo that says this is the good Venezuelan, Habibis. So it's quite obvious, right? The pattern is really identical in this case to the previous regime change operations. Find a figure with Western credentials, frame them as the voice of the people, and pour media oxygen into their campaign. So step 1, economic asphyxiation. Step 2, opposition incubation. Step 3, media manufacturing. And I assure you, you have seen this movie before. Every Western network suddenly discovers concern for the Venezuelan people, right? Documentaries appear, emotional interviews, Netflix, hashtags on social media platforms. Meanwhile, the same outlets that have ignored Yemen, Gaza, Syria, Haiti for decades begin to lecture Caracas about democracy. When they say humanitarian crisis, they never mention that the sanctions they applauded helped create this situation, right? When they say dictator, they don't mention elections, opposition media, or any nuance at all. I mean, this woman, Machado or whatever, I think she lives in Venezuela, right? And before him, that Guaido also lived in Venezuela. So how is it that so dictatorship that these people can just be so blatantly assets for the United States and still live peacefully and without getting arrested in Venezuela? Question mark, question mark. But it's always about storytelling. It's not about reporting. And it works, always works, because repetition is the mother of consent. And once enough headlines agree and there is a unified narrative, the public stops questioning the premise. And that's all the time. It happens all the time. So we had step 1, economic asphyxiation, step 2, opposition incubation, step 3, media manufacturing, and step 4 is covert actions and destabilization. By now, the environment in Venezuela is ripe for something to happen. You get mysterious blackouts, armed incursions, or drone attacks, and when they fail, Washington denies involvement. And this should be familiar to you because we have seen this, for example, in the Bay of Pigs. We have seen it in Operation Cyclone. This blend of plausible deniability and direct interference has defined US foreign policy for generations. And now, under Trump's new directive, the CIA is once again authorized to gather, disrupt, and neutralize assets inside Venezuela, meaning sabotage, infiltration, and targeted operations are back on the table. So the goal isn't necessarily, by the way, invasion. It could be the erosion of governance inside Venezuela until collapse seems inevitable. Then Venezuela finally struggles to maintain order. The media chorus says, see, the system failed. It's time for intervention. This is what they're going to do, in my opinion. And this leads us to step 5, the humanitarian mask. Because this is the genius or cruelty of it all, right? Every phase is wrapped in moral language. Economic warfare is sanctions for democracy. Funding opposition groups is support for civil society. CIA operations are defending human rights. Even warships near Venezuelan waters are labeled anti-narcotics. But the US empire never says it is conquering or conquesting. It says it is helping. But as the saying goes, when someone keeps helping other countries that end up destroyed, maybe it's not really helping them. Maybe just an idea. I don't know. Maybe you know better. You let me know in the comments. And we move here to step 6, and this is about the payoff, right? If regime change succeeds, the reward is enormous for the US. The new Venezuelan leadership would privatize oil, signs favorable contracts, and reopens the economy, not for Venezuelans, by the way, but for the American corporations. So Machado has already told Donald Trump Jr. that US companies are going to make a lot of money. I showed you the video, right? Like she's doing like a sales pitch. And please make no mistake, my friends, the appetite in the US is so huge. It's very huge. American energy firms have been drooling over the Orinoco Belt for many, many years. And Orinoco Belt, I will show you probably on the map. I forgot to, this is the, let's see, maybe this one is better. Yeah, this is the map. I will show you. This is the Orinoco Belt. And they have been really drooling over the Orinoco Belt for many, many years. And this is a field that could supply the US for decades if of oil, of course, and gas if properly exploited. So for the American corporations, for Wall Street, Venezuela isn't a country in crisis. It is like an untapped portfolio, right? So you have to see it that way. And from here, we move to the last step, step 7, and that is rebranding. If everything happens and the US was successful and the regime change happened, they will rebrand the aftermath just like they did in Syria, remember. Because once the dust settles, Washington and its media partners, we will rewrite history. The intervention will be described as a difficult but necessary path for democracy. The social chaos that follows privatization would be blamed on the previous regime's legacy, and the victims, those are the ordinary Venezuelans who will lose jobs, savings, and sovereignty, will completely vanish from the narrative. You will not see them doing reportages on the ground and talking to Venezuelan people, just like they're not asking Syrian people now what they think of the new regime in Damascus. Meanwhile, they are living in poverty. And meanwhile, my friends, the architects of destruction will be invited to think tank panels, and they will write memoirs titled "How We Saved Venezuela." This is going to happen. They're so shameless, so shameless. So I think here we have to really say something about the invisible cost. And here is what they never count, and that is when families really torn apart by immigration, the children who die from medicine shortages, the farmers who lose subsidies when public programs collapse, the entire generation grow up under sanctions and propaganda. So I think the larger pattern here, when we zoom out, you will see that Venezuela is just one node, basically, in a much larger map. which is the global system of economic pressure and ideological policing of the world. Any country that tries to assert independence, whether it is Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, Syria, even Hungary nowadays, when it drifts too far, faces the same playbook in different packaging. Washington, in my opinion, doesn't invade anyone. Like the days of the 2003 is over. They don't have to. They impose sanctions. They support NGOs and social networks to do the job for them inside the country. And that's what makes modern empires so elegant. It's like it's invisible enough to call itself democracy, right? So let's be honest. We have to be also honest about Venezuela, my friend. And I think in this case, we have to be fair. Like long before sanctions, Venezuela's own leadership had created fertile ground for collapse. For years, oil revenues were treated like an endless pousse, or it's like an asset. When crude prices were high, the government spent lavishly. When prices crashed, the system had no buffer. Bureaucracy bloated, corruption flourished, and entire ministries became patronage networks, right? Transparency International ranks Venezuela 178 out of 180 countries for corruption, just 2 spots from the bottom. Billions vanished through exchange rate schemes and fake imports contracts. Even the social missions, the Bolivarian government's proudest achievement, became riddled with inefficiency and favoritism. So the result was a paradox, right? A revolution for the poor run by people who get very rich. We have to be honest also about our approach to Venezuela. For the sake of the Venezuelan people, we are saying these things. For example, by 2018, prices were doubling every few weeks. Ordinary Venezuelans carried wads and bolivares in plastic bags just to buy bread. Eventually, the government legalized the US dollar as a way to stabilize daily transactions. And ironically, the socialist state survived thanks to the enemy's currency. Today, Caracas cafes, for example, charge in dollars, imported goods fill boutique shelves, and small businesses operate on social media marketplaces. So the macro numbers of the economy look grim. The IMF projects inflation above 200% in Venezuela. A daily life is less chaotic than during the worst years. The economy, for example, is slowly breathing again, though unevenly. Recovery lives in the capital, not in the countryside. So we really have to tell the truth to the people also about the failure of the Venezuelan government. We spoke about the sanctions, but we need also to speak about the economic failure of the Venezuelan economy. And it reminds me of Syria, because during the harshest days of the sanctions against Syria, we have seen this 1 to 2% of the society has become so rich, so blatantly, so provokingly. Like if you were an ordinary Syrian people, 90% were below the poverty line, and then you see people driving Maseratis, Lamborghinis, Ferraris. Very, very few people, but there were people like that. So how is it possible that you're under sanctions and people had the latest iPhones? And the latest iPhones, if you have the money for the latest iPhone, it's like you have the money to feed your family for 3 to 4 months, right? And these things, if they're happening also in Venezuela, that's a really bad sign, in my opinion. So let's go back to geopolitics a little bit and how the hemisphere is turning left again. I think the first warning for Washington came quietly over the past few years, because Latin America was long treated as the backyard of the United States, began drifting out of the orbit. For example, some may argue and say Brazil returned to the Workers' Party under Lula, Mexico under Mexico started calling for Latin American integration independent of the US dollar. Colombia elected, I think, Petro, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's the first left-wing president who openly questioned NATO's role in the region. Argentina is gone. It's on the US side. Bolivia has tilted toward more sovereign nationalist policies. It's not like all of these Latin American countries love socialism, but I think they are tired of dependency, right? They watched decades of IMF so-called reforms deliver debt and not prosperity, just like also in Egypt. So they're looking elsewhere, right? They're looking to China for credit. They're looking to BRICS for trade and to one another for political cover. And this is the new landscape, in my opinion, Venezuela. I think in this new landscape, Venezuela has become, for the other Latin American countries, a symbol of defiance. I will still continue this live streaming, guys, because I still have a few points to make. Even if we do over 1 hour, I would really appreciate it if you just hit the like button as you watch this stream. It really helps me with the algorithm of YouTube, and this stream reaches to more people. If you appreciate the work I'm doing here, the independent geopolitical journalistic work, I would really appreciate it if you hit the thumbs up, really. Let me just play this video for you for some entertainment as we do my monologue. So you probably noticed that every time Washington isolates a country, BRICS expands, right? What started as a modest club of emerging economies, Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa, is now transforming into a parallel world system. This year alone, for example, we had Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, and Argentina joining the BRICS or expressing intent to join the group. Together, BRICS Plus now accounts for more than 45% of global oil production and nearly half the world's population. And one of its guiding principles is precisely what Washington fears, and that is non-interference in domestic affairs. And Venezuela fits perfectly into that model, right? It supplies oil, minerals, and geopolitical legitimacy to a bloc that rejects US sanctions as diplomatic weapon. That's why Caracas and Beijing recently renewed a 20-year strategic partnership. That's why Russia keeps a military presence at Venezuela's ports. And that's why Iran sends tankers when others won't. For Washington, it is not just about ideology anymore. It is about losing control of resources and influence to a system where the dollar and the Pentagon do not automatically decide outcomes, right? So if Washington, my friends, if I'm saying Washington, if Washington could flip Venezuela back into its sphere, it would be a double victory for the United States. It would be a windfall for American energy companies and a serious blow to BRICS credibility. Imagine this: the world's largest oil reserves suddenly accessible to ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Halliburton. That would ease US energy inflation, stabilize fuel prices before the 2026 elections, and deliver a symbolic win. I would call it more than symbolic win over China and Russia. So when the senators whom I referred today and showed you the videos talk about helping the Venezuelan people, what they really mean is restoring US access to Venezuelan oil before BRICS solidifies it as a multipolar partner. That's the reality. So the global lesson. Sean. So what's at stake for Washington, my friends? If regime change succeeds, in my opinion, Washington gets a domino effect in Latin America. It gets domino effect in Latin America. It's a psychological win that reestablishes its dominance after a decade of failed interventions. It would prove that the empire can still discipline a rebel state even in the age of BRICS, digital currencies, and waning or weakened dollar supremacy. That's why this fight is existential for both sides. One is defending sovereignty and the other defending relevance. And I have to say that empires rarely die quietly. They really go down swinging in sanctions, in coups, in covert actions, and they disguise it as diplomacy. For that happens so many times. So if we want to draw a global lesson, I think when we watch this new offensive against Venezuela, we are watching a test case for the 21st century. We have to ask ourselves this question: can a mid-sized nation resist economic strangulation and media warfare long enough to stay independent? Can alternative alliances like BRICS Plus, CELAC, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization really protect members from Western pressure? Or will the old order reassert itself one more time through sheer financial muscle and military shadow? And Venezuela is the stage where all the questions would be answered. We will see. We will see the answers. What Venezuela has shown. Let's see. Where is it? I think for more than 20 years, this small Caribbean country has survived coups, sanctions, media wars, and now covert operations. Venezuela has made the U.S. made all the possible steps against it: economic, military, intelligence. Yet Venezuela is still standing. That alone, I think, deserves a moment of recognition, because in the empire's rulebook, a country like Venezuela was never supposed to last this long. It was supposed to collapse, privatize, and politely hand back the keys to the oil fields. Instead, it stumbled, adapted, and persisted. I think that persistence really matters, because it tells every other nation that independence isn't a single event, it's a daily act of endurance, and it could inspire other nations as well. But defiance, my friends, has a price. For Venezuelans, it meant blackouts, hyperinflation, hunger, exile. For the government in Venezuela, it meant isolation and compromise with allies that carry their own baggage. For Washington, it meant that the slow erosion of credibility, because after so many so-called humanitarian interventions, people have learned to read between the lines. So when the U.S. now talks about freedom, much of the world hears oil, right? When it speaks of democracy, much of the world hears destabilization. When the U.S. speaks of peace, much of the world look at it as drone attacks, right? So the United States, of course, still wields enormous power, military, financial, cultural, but Venezuela exposes the contradiction, right, at its heart. A superpower that calls itself a defender of liberty, yet spends decades trying to decide who governs everyone else. In that mirror, I think Americans could see their own dilemma. The same system that promises them prosperity spends their taxes on endless interventions. It isn't just Venezuelans who pay the price of this empire. It's also the ordinary American who get poorer while the defense stocks get richer, right? So I think now comes the hard part. Will Venezuela reform itself before exhaustion turns defiance into inertia? Will the opposition choose a negotiation over foreign sponsorship? No. Will Venezuela reform itself before exhaustion? I doubt. Will the United States learn that influence built on respect lasts longer than control built on fear? No. You have the simple answers. So, my friends, the lesson of Venezuela isn't be socialist or be anti-American. It's, I think, simpler. No nation should decide the destiny of another. Sovereignty is messy, of course. It's imperfect, sometimes corrupt, but it is the only soil where real reform can grow, right? I think if Washington truly cared about democracy, it would let others practice it in their own language. If it truly cared about peace, it would stop exporting wars disguised as aid. And if it truly cared about freedom, it could start by granting it to others. What do you think about this very controversial and radical idea? Rami Habibi, thank you so much for gifting Syriana Analysis sticker. And what do you think, my friends, about this? I don't know if I have to call it a lesson. I sometimes hesitate calling this a lesson, but I think it was a nice lesson for many people who want to know more about Venezuela and want to make up their mind. Do you think the US will intervene directly? Do you think there will be boots on the ground? I doubt it. I think they will try to strangle Venezuela enough and wage covert operations inside, create instability, and then encourage a revolution by the usual suspects against the Maduro government and make the job done by them. This is how I believe it will happen. If it happens, of course. I'm not here to speculate or foresee, but I think that Venezuelan government has to be very, very careful now, because the wolves are on the borders, and the wolves are already behind the fence, or on the side of the Venezuelan side of the fence. Let me know your opinions, my friends. If you like this stream, the easy thing to do is to hit the like button. Subscribe to Syriana Analysis to not miss the next stream tomorrow. And if you like to do more, and only if you can, and you would like to support the independent work I'm doing, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis, or you could simply scan this QR code. And if you don't like to use Patreon, there are different other means in the description below. Until tomorrow, my friends, thank you so much for tuning in to today's stream. I appreciate you all, whether you watch this on YouTube, on Rumble, or on Ganjin World, and I will see you tomorrow on Tuesday. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.